Good day, class. I'm Professor Darrell Ouellette, and this is Introduction to Criminal Justice. And this will be Lecture 6. In Lecture 6, I'll be lecturing on police and community relations. I'll also be talking about police ethics, use of force, and police stress. In previous lectures, we started out with discussing the early beginnings of the U.S. criminal justice system. I showed you what I call a criminal justice funnel, and in that funnel I discussed the crime problem in the United States, how the police came to be, the history of police, mentioned policing in American society, and how the criminal justice decision network works. Now I'd like to spend some time basically talking about how police officers deal with the public as far as community relations, and the importance of police having a good rapport with the public. As I just mentioned, the criminal justice funnel, we're still talking about how crimes are reported, the interaction between police and the public, the importance of having a mutual respect for each other, and the importance of working together. That will be discussed in this lecture. First of all, what is community policing? Simply defined, it is the community and police working together to solve crime problems within the community. Community policing puts officers in closer proximity to people they serve, thereby changing the perceptions police often have about people in high crime areas. Police do have a perception that if there's a lot of crime going on in a certain neighborhood, then everybody in the neighborhood is possibly a criminal, but that's not the case. By putting people more in touch, or by putting police more in touch with residences in a neighborhood, they soon learn that not everyone is a criminal, and not everyone is involved in some sort of illegal activity. Most generally, police deal with 5% of the population. 5% of the population are the people who are the ones that really commit crimes. The other 95% are generally law-abiding and honest citizens. The last bulletin here, or last point, community policing involves getting to the root of a criminal complaint to prevent further crime problems. Police increasingly view crime as a problem to be solved, not merely an event to which the police react. In this view, the community is seen as a partner in solving crime, not as onlookers or witnesses, or information sources to be interviewed after the criminal event, after a crime has occurred. The community is seen by the police as constituents, and police try to inform the community on police matters, and they expect the public to help them, the police, deal with complex crime problems. This view of this type of policing calls for a different type of police officer than was common a generation ago. During the 1970s and 1980s, police departments faced external pressures from the communities to change their daily activities. Now, what was their daily activity? Well, police officers rarely got out of their cars in the 70s and 80s because it was kind of a us against them attitude. They felt that their job was just to get out of the car and give a ticket or investigate a case and maybe arrest somebody. But they soon learned that as resources diminished, as crime increased, and the number of police officers did not increase accordingly, they find that they need the help of the public to help them not just solve crime, give them information, but also the help of the public to watch out for their neighbors, to call the police and give them information or report a crime, rather than the police driving around all the time looking for crime. A lot of communities, especially the minority communities in the 70s and 80s, demanded that police become more involved in the life of those communities in order to identify ways to serve them better. The minorities felt that police were constantly harassing them when they should be better serving them. Oftentimes the police would use unnecessary force on minorities, and that was bitterly criticized. Use of force will be discussed later on in this lecture, and I will be getting back to that. I want to mention something about police administrators. These are the ones that these are the chiefs, the commissioners, the higher-ups in a police agency, especially large police agencies. These are the ones that develop policy and so forth. They have strict guidelines on how to do your job. They're the ones that, police administrators are the ones who hire and fire police officers. I want to mention something about what their viewpoints are. And I'm going to read a section from a criminal justice book which was written by Patrick Anderson and Donald Newman. Patrick Anderson and Donald Newman wrote that police administrators have come to realize that the traditional, rigid organizational structure of police departments is not capable of meeting community demands. Despite that structure, police officers exercise a broad and unregulated discretionary power, which has also always been tacitly accepted as necessary by police administrators. Police administrators do want police officers to be rigid. They want 8 hours work for 8 hours pay, but we're getting away from that. Police officers are given a lot of discretionary power through very strict policy and procedures. So, in continuing to read from this paragraph out of this book, the administrators, when those administrators began attempting to define the discretionary power through policies and structured procedures, they found themselves at a loss to prescribe the proper response to the varied situations police officers encounter. These administrators were unable to write rules for appropriate, creative police responses. Moreover, police administrators have increasingly become aware that a new generation of police officers is less willing than its predecessors to submit to authoritative organizational structures. So what they're saying is the police officer today is much more modern, and they're a little resistant to being specifically told what to do for every specific situation, because every specific situation is different on how you should handle it. Police officers today have found that incident-driven police work fails to motivate many officers because the officers find the opportunities for meaningful work limited. They do not feel a sense of responsibility for the outcome of their work, and they do not receive feedback about how well they are doing their jobs. So if you're a boss, if you're a police chief, the officers of today want the police chief to tell them how well they're doing their jobs. And that's how evaluations came out, where they have a chance to talk with the police chief. They need that constant feedback as to how well they are doing their job. And also, they must be prepared to get negative feedback. But in dealing with the public, police welcome the fact that the public will tell them that they're doing a good job. So they appreciate that. So police organizations have found that they need to reform to meet the needs of the modern police officer. Some police administrators attempted to bring police officers into the communities they serve through team policing. This type of approach placed small groups of officers in storefront-centered stations, meaning that the police were very visible, and that by storefront it meant that the people could just walk into a police station and not have to go into this big administrative building and try to find an office where police were centered. If you put a police station right on the main drag on a highway, or you put a police station right in downtown where they can walk in from the sidewalk, it encourages people to come in. It encourages contact between police and citizens, and helps develop relationships between police and neighborhood residents and merchants. Team policing at first was not a widespread success, partly because of resistance to change on the part of those entrenched police organizations. Some police organizations just didn't want to do this. But out of this community policing effort, 3 tactics survived. Police agencies, the large city police, are going back to foot patrols where police officers are able to talk to citizens. This community policing effort also created what we call community watch programs, which organize neighborhoods to keep watch and note any suspicious persons or activities in their neighborhoods. And then the third tactic, the storefront police stations, meaning that police officers have easy access to the public and vice versa. So with these 3 tactics, police were present in community at all times, giving them constant communication and contact with citizens. This exposure in turn led to additional neighborhood demands to expand the scope of police work. If you have access to citizens, if citizens feel that they can stop by the police station anytime, they'll come in and express their concern about a lot of different things. They'll complain about broken windows in town, and they'll complain about juveniles being unruly, and they'll complain about public drunks, but they'll also give you information on burglaries and other types of crimes. So in my reading this section out of a book, this is what I'm summarizing for you. By being in closer proximity to people, police find that they also become problem solvers for people. A lot of people will stop by the police department and they'll want directions. They'll ask about various tourist information, places to go see. They'll expect police officers to be social workers to fix some of their problems. They may expect police officers to be electricians or carpenters. By that I mean they'll call the police department when there's a power failure, or they'll wonder, they'll ask questions about, is there power out just in my house, or is the rest of my street out of power? When police investigate burglaries, some people will expect the police to fix the door that was broken or kicked in. So there are a lot of demands from the public, from police officers, and there will be police officers who will, on their time off, maybe fix a door, or maybe take a few minutes to fix it while they're on duty. There'll be police officers who will go down into a cellar or basement and check the electrical panel and see whether or not there's a circuit breaker out or a fuse that has to be replaced. So with this constant interaction with the community, police also find themselves giving advice to people where to go to solve a problem. If they have a question about Social Security, or question about where to buy the best burglar alarm, or how to better secure their homes. And again, I'll mention the Neighborhood Watch Program. Point number 3 here. As a result of these community policing efforts, neighborhood watch programs were developed. DARE, which is Drug Awareness Resistance Education. This is a program that was popular in the schools, especially in the 90s, and where police officers would go in and talk to primarily 5th graders and give talks about drug awareness, alcohol resistance, educate students about the evils of using drugs and alcohol. And with this program, students became very comfortable talking to police officers. Police are also heavily involved in domestic violence support groups. Because we enforce domestic violence laws, we arrest abusers. We also have a close relationship with victims to make sure that they're aware of what support groups they can go to, how to get restraining orders, and what they can do to protect themselves. Police ethics. As I mentioned earlier, I'd like to say a few things about police ethics. There are entire courses on police ethics. Police ethics is very important to both police and the public. The public demands that police be ethical, they be honest, they be fair to everyone. The need for community policing programs also involve the need to have better relations between the public and police. And by that I also mean that the public needs to respect the police and vice versa in order for them to have a good relationship. Unlike firefighters, who enjoy a much more favorable standing with the public, police officers are often criticized by the public. I always tell my students that if you want to be popular, if you want to have a job in public safety and want to be popular, firefighters enjoy a much more favorable standing in the community. Mostly because, well, firefighters don't write tickets. They don't cost you money. They don't send you to court. They don't send you to jail. And so the public is much more comfortable with a firefighter than they are with a police officer, because oftentimes the public thinks that the police officers are out to get them, and that police officers are watching their every move. You get that feeling every time you look in your rearview mirror and there's a cop car behind you. You automatically look down at your speedometer to see if you're speeding, and you're very paranoid. You want to make sure that you come to a complete stop at a stop sign. You signal left and right turns, and drive properly. So police officers cause us a lot more stress than firefighters do. And police officers are there to serve and protect, just like firefighters, but they also, there's a negative side to what police officers do. And I once worked for a man who said that I, go out and do, or every day get up and see what you can do for people, not what you can do to them as a police officer. And police are often criticized by the public for not doing the right thing. Police are restricted by rules of evidence, search and seizure, laws of arrest. Police can't always do what they want to do because they're restricted by laws, by the Constitution. But the public often doesn't understand that. They think that the police should be doing this, or that there's a lot of police officers and they can just do surveillance on their business and watch to see that their business does not get broken into. They're often very critical of the police. Even though less this the third bulletin here, third bullet, even though less than 1% of police officers are involved in police corruption, the media capitalizes on such cases, and the public will often distrust the police. The public always remembers when a police officer goes bad. They don't always remember when a police officer does something good, like save a life, do something heroic, or solve a case. Because public trust of police is so important in officers carrying out their duties, there is a need for police administrators to report all police corruption. Nothing is more distasteful to the public than a police officer gone bad. Large police agencies have an internal affairs unit to investigate the complaints made against officers. In smaller agencies, they have to rely on the police chief to conduct such investigations. So if a police officer does something wrong, which may be, it could be something as simple as rudeness to the public, or it could be something more serious like a crime, stealing, perjury, whatever. That must be investigated by an internal affairs unit, whether it's within that agency itself or through a higher agency like the Attorney General's office. Most complaints against police are not of a criminal nature. The most common complaint on police officers by the public is, they'll call and they'll say, well, this officer was rude to me. As a commander, former commander, now retired, I had as much as 30 police officers work for me at one time, and I would field calls from the public complaining about how my officer treated them, that they were rude, or they would complain that they saw the officer speeding, particularly uniformed officers in a marked cruiser. They would be passing them, exceeding this posted speed limit. Now, the officer may have been going to a a serious complaint. But I always told my officers that if you're going to an emergency, then you need to use your blue lights and siren if you're going to be exceeding the posted speed. That tells the public that they're going to an emergency. Now, if they're just in a hurry to get to a routine complaint, then speeding is not allowed. Oftentimes the public would call me and complain that they were wrongly charged by a police officer, particularly given a speeding ticket or charged with some other type of offense. And I would tell them that that's why we have courts, judges and juries. If they think they were wrongly charged, then go in and plead not guilty and ask for their case to be reviewed in a trial. And I've often gotten calls about the behavior of police off duty. You know, some police officer was seen having a beer in a bar. People fail to realize that police officers are common citizens. They enjoy the freedoms that every common citizen is awarded, and they're allowed to have a drink off duty. They're allowed to be in a public place to drink where others are allowed. The police officers occasionally have a party. They're allowed to make a little noise within legal limits. They're allowed to do anything that the average citizen is allowed to do, again within legal limits. Examples of criminal behavior by police. Well, one common example is bribery. Bribery is criminal conduct. Bribery is a police officer accepting money or gifts for non-enforcement of the law. By that I mean you go to charge somebody and they want to give you money or a gift so that you don't charge them with breaking the law. Or in the city, police officers are paid to stay away because some sort of criminal activity is going to be taking place in a store, some sort of possibly a drug buy will be going down, and so police are paid to stay away. Police officers stopping someone for speeding, and instead of handing the officer your license, you hand them a $20 bill or a $100 bill. That is bribery, and it's against the law. It's against the law for the police officer to accept it, and it's against the law for the citizen to offer it. You could be charged. Chiseling is another type of misbehavior by police. Chiseling is a police officer demanding discounts for anything they purchase, like food or clothing, demanding that they give the officer a discount, or giving them free admission to a concert or a movie or a ball game, or demanding free food, not having to pay for food. That is called chiseling. Extortion is another type of criminal behavior. The threat of enforcement and arrest if a bribe is not given. Telling a store owner that you will charge him with something unless he gives you money. That's extortion. Mooching. Again, similar to chiseling, mooching is actually accepting discounts, free admission, free food. Not as serious. You're not demanding, but you're just accepting. If someone's giving you free admission, free food, that's discount. That is considered criminal behavior for a police officer. Other examples of criminal behavior by police: perjury, lying under oath or lying for other police officers caught in illegal activity. If you're a police officer, you're expected to tell the truth while you're under oath. Most common place that officers are under oath are testifying in a courtroom proceeding, or if they have to be interviewed because they know of other police officers that were caught in illegal activity, they're expected to tell the truth. Otherwise, it's called perjury. Prejudice. Police officers are not supposed to be prejudiced. They need to equally enforce the law amongst all citizens, not just dwell on enforcing the law where minorities are involved. All citizens must be treated equally. Shakedown or shopping. This is stealing items from crime scenes or persons while in an official capacity. An example of a shakedown or shopping would be finding that a business door is not locked at night and going in and helping yourself to whatever's in the store. Grabbing a soft drink or grabbing a pack of cigarettes or a pack of chewing gum in a convenience store after finding that the door is not locked. And then calling the owner and saying, hey, come down and lock your door. Or going to a burglary where a store has been burglarized, and I've heard of stories where police officers would grab a TV set, put it in the trunk of their cruiser, and tell the store owner that the store was broken into and a lot more is missing than what the burglar actually took. Helping them, police officer was helping themselves as well, and thinking that the store owner wouldn't miss an extra TV or piece of electronic equipment, tools or whatever, that they would just claim it on their insurance and nobody would be hurt by it. But that is what we call a shakedown or shopping. It's a crime. Part of police ethics involves the use of force. The public will sometimes complain that police officers use too much force on them and the force was illegal. Improper or illegal use of force is a frequent complaint against police. Improper or illegal use of force includes both non-deadly force and deadly force. And those are self-explanatory. Non-deadly force, of course, is being assaulted by police and the assault was not serious enough to cause death or injury. Police are allowed to use just enough force to effect an arrest from a person who is resisting arrest. Police are not allowed to use force if an arrest is not being or going to be effected. So, if a police officer is about to arrest a person, that police officer can only use enough force to effect the arrest. So, if a police officer tells a person they're under arrest and the person resists, if the person just doesn't want to have his hands placed in handcuffs and is resisting, a police officer is not allowed to shoot them or club them over the head, but they are allowed to use just enough force so that they can put the handcuffs on. And oftentimes the police will advise the person that they'll be using force unless the person cooperates. And examples of use of force would be using a taser. A taser is an electronic piece of equipment that a police officer carries on their belt, which when fired or touched against a person's body will give an electrical charge, temporarily paralyzing them. Or the police officer can use what we call capstun. Capstun or mace, as it's often called, is a chemical spray. When sprayed against at a person, will cause that person's eyes to become extremely irritated, to the point where they will have a hard time to see. they'll be incapacitated to the point where they're disoriented, and the police officer can then have the advantage of subduing them. It makes your nose run, it makes your eyes run to the point where you can't see. It's a red pepper substance, which is very irritating to the system. So if a person is resisting arrest, the officer commonly uses those two types of force. Now, if the person who's resisting arrest steps up to the level of resistance, whereby even though they've been tasered or they've been cap stunned, at this point, if they start applying force to the officer by means of a punch or a kick or some sort of physical force which could injure the officer at that point is allowed to use a little more force to subdue the person. The officer may block a punch and punch back, or use a nightstick to try to control the person. When people are on some sort of drug, sometimes cap stun will have no effect on them, and that's why tasers have come along. They're a little bit more effective than cap stun, but the officer is only allowed to use the force necessary to subdue a person. They cannot go to extremes and shoot a person who is unarmed or poses no deadly threat to the officer. And so use of force is very restricted. If police do not have free will to do whatever they want. Probably the case that drew the most attention to the police use of force is the Tennessee versus Garner case in 1985. This was a Supreme Court decision which severely restricted the use of deadly force by police. Now, deadly force has always been the greatest concern over the use of force by police, because it has to do with the infliction of death or serious injury on citizens and criminal suspects. Since this U.S. Supreme Court decision in 1985, the use of deadly force has been severely restricted, and police shootings of suspects and citizens have been reduced. Now, those of you not familiar with the Garner case, in the Garner case, an unarmed teenage boy was shot as he fled from a house burglary, failing to heed the warning to stop given by a Memphis police officer. The boy later died of a gunshot wound to the head. He was found with $10 in his pocket, and he had stolen, which he had stolen from the home. The Memphis officer was acting in compliance with his department's policy on the use of deadly force, and within the law in Tennessee and in most states in the nation at that time. Now, this was in the early 1980s. Now, giving the law at that time gave law enforcement officers the authority to use deadly force to stop a fleeing felon, even when they know the suspect is unarmed and not likely to be in danger to another person. Now, back in England, under common law, that practice was permitted. So before the 1980s, if someone was a fleeing felon, and in this case, this boy committed a burglary, and the officer knew that he had broken into a house and he was trying to run away, you could shoot somebody who was escaping from a felony when they after they were ordered to stop and they did not stop. So it took the killing of a teenage boy for the Supreme Court to say, hey, this is not allowed, especially when the fleeing felon poses no threat to the police officer. The use of deadly force is justifiable if all of the following conditions exist. Again, this is as a result of the Supreme Court decision. They've decided that we're going to allow police to use deadly force, but these 4 conditions must exist before they can. If they're going to arrest someone for a felony, that's one condition. The second condition is the police officer effecting the arrest is authorized to act as a peace officer or is assisting a peace officer. Peace officer is another name for a police officer. And the third condition that must exist, the force being employed creates no substantial risk or injury to innocent persons. So if you're decided that you can use deadly force, you can't shoot at a suspect who's standing in a crowd of innocent persons, or he's standing in front of a school, or the police officer must be accountable for every bullet that is fired from a weapon. So even though you're justified in shooting somebody, you are not justified in creating a substantial risk or injury to innocent persons. So in a city, if you're about to shoot somebody, you need to be aware of your surroundings, not place innocent persons at risk. And the fourth condition that must exist is that the crime for which the person is being arrested involve conduct in which the arrested person used or threatened to use the use of deadly force, and that deadly force will continue to be used if an arrest is delayed. What that means is that you are arresting somebody who has just used deadly force or threatened to use deadly force, and that if you allow this person to escape, deadly force will continue to be used. Let me give you an example. A bank robber goes into a bank and holds up the bank and tells everybody in the bank that, give me the money or I'll shoot. Even though the bank robber did not shoot anybody, he threatened to shoot somebody. And so that threat of that they will use deadly force is enough for a police officer to shoot that bank robber if he does not comply with the officer's demands. So let's say the police arrive at the bank. They're on the phone with the bank manager who says that a robber has just come in and robbed the bank and threatened to shoot people if they didn't comply or give them money. So now the police know that this bank robber has used deadly threat. Even though they didn't kill anybody, they used a deadly threat. Now if the police confront the bank robber outside the bank, and again there are no innocent persons around, they're standing in front of a bank, and they order the bank robber to drop their weapon, and they're under arrest. If the bank robber fails to comply and continues to run, at that point, because the police already know that the bank robber has threatened deadly force, they can shoot that bank robber, because if they allow him to escape, that bank robber may shoot someone else who tries to arrest them. Most often bank robbers will exchange gunfire between the police on the sidewalk in front of a bank. But even if they don't exchange gunfire, if they point a weapon towards the police, they can be shot, or if they continue to escape, they can be shot because they pose a threat to others who try to apprehend them. The Gardner decision, no doubt, was long overdue, and it included a rule that many police agencies in the nation had adopted years earlier. The use of deadly force is sometimes ambiguous, which means that it's not clear-cut. Sometimes the situation is not clear-cut, and the officers using deadly force, they used deadly force because they thought the use of deadly force against them was imminent. For example, someone who's acting suspiciously, police officer responds to a theft within a convenience store. Not quite clear if it's a robbery or just a theft. The difference between the two is a theft is just stealing something. A robbery is stealing something with the use of a weapon or with the use of force. So let's say a police officer confronts somebody in front of the convenience store, tells them to stop. The officer does not see any weapon, but when the officer tells the person to put their hands up, instead of doing that, the person reaches inside their coat. In that situation, depending on how the call came in by the convenience store owner, did the person use deadly force inside or threaten to use deadly force? Even though the officer does not see a gun, if they see someone reaching in their jacket, police officers have shot and killed people that way. And so the situation is not clear-cut, but the officer in his own mind felt that deadly force was imminent against them, and they shot and killed the person, even though the person may have just been reaching for something inside their pocket like a handkerchief or their glasses, or may have been reaching for an ID. It might have been an off-duty officer reaching for some identification, and not a gun. All cases of deadly force, whether they're justified or not, are investigated by an independent agency, the Office of Attorney General, which is a higher agency. They're independent, meaning they're not part of the police department, and they determine whether force was justified or not. The last topic I'd like to discuss in this lecture is police stress. Police officers are the subject of continual scrutiny by the people they serve. They are routinely faced with complicated and frequently dangerous problems in which they are supposed to react quickly and at the same time appropriately. Police officers are constantly expected to make decisions and solve complicated problems. Police often find themselves in a difficult role because, again, they're the subject of public scrutiny for how they serve the public. They're often in a no-win situation. They are expected to make decisions to complicated problems they come across while on duty. And their police academy training, they're trained to be suspicious of potentially dangerous individuals, and every citizen contact is stressful. They're always on their guard. Some factors that you should consider: because it is nearly impossible to train police officers for every type of possible situation they will encounter, police are often left to make decisions on their own. Discretion is a big part of police decisions. Police look at the information they have, and they are left to make their own choices as to how they will handle the situation, whether to enforce a law or not. Discretion is a big part of their job. Now, because of this, because they are often left on their own to make tough decisions, they're in no-win situations. There are several studies of health and safety among occupational groups, and these groups have identified that the police profession they have a high incidence of stress, which is comparable to an air traffic controller. An air traffic controller has to make quick decisions. You have planes coming in. Which plane will they allow to land? Which plane will have to circle for a while? Distance between planes coming into an airport. They also have to worry about planes taking off and making sure that they're not that planes are within reasonable limits of each other. Well, police officers have to make tough decisions as well. Life and death decisions. Whether they will arrest someone, whether there's enough evidence to arrest someone, shoot, don't shoot type situations. A lot of stress involved in a job, in that job. High-speed chases are very stressful. Should I chase this person? What this person has done, is it serious enough for me to exceed the posted speed to try to catch them? Will I endanger the public by chasing this person down the street in a speeding motor vehicle? Because of excessive job pressures, police officer characteristics identified as stress indicators include high divorce rate. There's a high divorce rate amongst police officers. Because they experience a lot of stress, they bring that stress home, and it causes problems within the family. Many police officers take up cigarette smoking to help control their stress. A lot of police officers abuse alcohol and use drugs. I say a lot. They abuse alcohol in an illegal sense. Some may use drugs illegally to combat stress. Because of this macho attitude that most police officers have, that they're able to handle any problem, sometimes they choose to self-medicate to take care of the problems that they have within themselves because of the stress of the job. Police officers, because of this stress, suffer from frequent headaches. They have high blood pressure, suffer from which creates a heart disease. Their diets are not good. They often have stomach ailments because they eat a lot of fast food on the job. They hurry up and eat because they're afraid that they're going to get called to a complaint and they won't have time to eat. They pay for a meal and they stuff it down because they may get called to an emergency and they won't have time to finish. All of this is not good for a police officer's health. Police officers have a tendency not to live very long because of all these potential ailments that they may have. The average death for a police officer is much younger than other occupations. Police job stress can also include the family. A police officer career is much more than just a job. It's a way of life. Oftentimes the officer will exclude the family from what they do at work because of the confidential nature of the work, or they don't want to talk about how they came close to being injured on the job. There was a threat of or danger to them on the job that day. They may not want to bring that home to their family because their family already considers that the job is dangerous, and they hide stuff from their spouses. And police schedules are irregular. Police officers work long hours. Sometimes they extend on their shifts because they're involved in an extensive investigation or intense investigation. They often work nights where the average citizen works days. So the spouse is left alone at night to take care of the children, or the spouse may work during the day. The husband has 3 weeks where they, or the husband or wife has 3 weeks where, as a police officer, they have to work the midnight shift, or they work an evening shift. So the officer not only is not seeing their spouse on a regular basis, but they're also not seeing the children. Police officers are required to work weekends as well. They're required to work holidays. The police family, the family of a police officer, may feel that they're alienated from the community. They may feel isolated from the community because of what the police officer, he or she, does. They may feel that the spouse of that police officer cannot be trusted, so they can't, they're not allowed to get confidential information from the public. The spouse may not be able to talk freely with her friends or his friends because of the nature of what the police officer does. They're afraid that the spouse will carry this back to the police officer, and the police officer will do something to them because of their behavior. I put in parentheses here the trooper's dog. When I first became a police officer, I've always had a dog, and I remember prior to being a police officer, anytime my dog got away from my property, it was always, well, Darrell's dog is here. Let's call Darrell. When I became a police officer, I no longer was Darrell. I was a trooper. And if my dog left my property and went to my neighbors, and other people found out about it, essentially I was violating a leash law where my dog has to be either on my property under my control at all times, or be on a leash or in a kennel. And so my dog became known as the trooper's dog. It's no longer Darrell's dog, it's a trooper's dog, meaning that I should know better. I'm a police officer, and I should follow the law to a T, and my dog cannot escape my property like other people's dogs. I would have other people's dogs on my property all the time, but as soon as my dog left my property, the phone would ring off the hook with people complaining that they saw my dog, and my dog should be tied. So officers are required to follow the letter of the law much more closely than the average citizen. Police often feel that they can only trust other police officers, and most often police officers will only be friendly with other police officers. They'll go out to eat with their spouse and another couple who are police officers. Police officers will hunt and fish together. They'll hang out together because they feel that they're the only ones that they can trust. They cannot associate so much with other people from other occupations because they're afraid that they'll see something illegal. They don't trust the public. They think that the public will scrutinize them for what they do, and so they cannot let their hair down and be comfortable, and they choose to be hanging around with just other police officers. And I've experienced that personally, that I have some friends that are not police officers, and I've kept a close relationship with over the years, but most of my friends are police officers because we oftentimes work the same schedule. We can relate with each other as to what we do. We can talk freely about what we do for work, whereas we cannot do that with with other people who are not in a police occupation. Police officers often experience a role conflict. The media, there are distorted media images which create special problems for the police. The media often fictionalizes the image of police work. Many officers will identify with the macho image of the John Wayne syndrome that I've mentioned in a previous lecture. So they have a role conflict from what they experienced before they were police officers. The public expects one thing because of what they see on TV, which is not reality. When police officers go to work on a criminal investigation case, a lot of cases don't get solved because there is no physical evidence to solve the case. But police feel that they have to do something to show the public that they have the ability to solve the case, even though there's no physical evidence there. Not every case has physical evidence. Even though the public expects to see physical evidence, it doesn't always happen. You're not always going to find a footprint or a fingerprint when something is stolen. You're not always going to have DNA results. And when you do have DNA results in a case, the DNA results take days to get back. They don't come back by the third commercial like they do on TV. Sometimes police officers let the job get to them to the point where they've experienced so much stress, they've got so much pressure on the job at their job, and all this stress and pressure may lead to serious issues such as a suicide. Suicide rates among police officers are among the highest in the nation. If you consider that the average police officer sees more tragedy in a week than an average citizen will experience in a lifetime, that creates stress. Think about it. If a police officer, how many people have seen mangled bodies in a car wreck, or children shot in a homicide, or murdered in a homicide, or children drown, or they've fallen in a swimming pool and drowned, or fallen in a river, or they were crushed by by a fallen tree while playing in the woods, or they were bodies are dismembered from a homicide scene. These are all things that police officers see quite often, where an average citizen may never see. The fact that a police officer may be seriously injured or killed in the line of duty is stressful. Anytime a police officer pulls a car over, they wonder, is this the day that I walk up to a car and that person will pull a gun and shoot me? Every vehicle stop is stressful. You never know who's in the car that you have stopped. A police officer worries about having to take someone's life in the line of duty, having to shoot somebody. They worry about it. And police officers also worry about their cases, that not all their cases will be solved. And I remember working on some homicide cases that were never solved. And it bothered me right up until retirement that I was not able to solve that case. That some young girl was murdered, and there's a killer walking out there. I may have a pretty good idea of who that killer is, but the evidence did not support an arrest. The case is still open. I still think about those cases today, even after I've been retired. So this is stressful to a police officer. And again, I mentioned earlier, police deal with the 5%ers on a daily basis. 5% of the population are the lawbreakers, the ones that give police a hard time, the ones that are unruly and disruptive and disorderly, and the ones that will break the law on a daily basis. But only 5% of the population do that. The other 95% law-abiding, good people. But police don't deal with this, with the 95% very often. They just deal with the 5%ers, because those are the ones that break the law, and the police officer has to do something about it. If you consider that a police officer is expected to resolve all possible emotional situations on the job, then that is more than an officer can handle. Again, the suicide rate amongst police officers is far above the average for most occupations. Suicide may be a path that an officer takes if stresses on the job are not resolved. To combat police stress, several police agencies have developed programs designed to provide relief and resolution of police stress for officers and their families. Many police agencies have incorporated counselors, chaplains, ride-along programs for spouses, and auxiliary police services for officers and their families. Many of these programs appear to help relieve the stresses of police work. I remember going through an academy, and I was single at the time, but my fellow classmates who were married during the very last week of the academy, the staff would invite spouses to come down, and they would meet with the spouses and let them know that the job that their husband was about to undertake, or in the case of a female police officer, the job that they were going to undertake as a police officer was much different, and spouses would be would get a better understanding of what the job entailed. So police agencies today spend a lot more time recommending counseling for police officers, having them go talk with a chaplain, doing ride-along programs for the spouses to help them understand what their spouse does as a police officer. In closing, I'd like to add one more thing. I became a police officer in 1977, and it was an idea that I had just prior to joining the police force. I really, during college, I went to college to be a school teacher, and I had an interest in being a game warden, and I thought about that for a long time, and then I realized that probably being a trooper was more along the line of what I wanted to do, as far as making a difference and protecting people and so on, and the do-gooder type of mentality that a lot of police officers have when they sign up for police work. But I remember probably the thing that was probably the greatest moment as far as me realizing that once I put on that uniform, the very first day on the job, I realized how different I was from the public once I put that uniform on. And my first realization was when I was given a police car. Troopers were allowed to bring cars home because we were on call 24 hours a day, and when I drove my police car from the academy, I had to drive over 250 miles to get home, and I drove up the interstate. And the first time that it dawned on me how I was now different than the public, when I was driving up the interstate, of course I was following the speed limit, and I realized that I was the only one following the speed limit. As I looked in my rearview mirror, I started seeing traffic backing up behind me because I was the only one following the speed limit, and as cars were speeding and catching up to me, they didn't dare go by me. So all of a sudden I felt this sense of power that my car is intimidating to the public. that they don't dare to go by me. Um, and so I realized that because of the position I was in, that people really paid attention to who I was. And so I stepped it up another 5 miles an hour over the speed limit, and but I continued to see cars piling up behind me or backed up behind me until I finally pulled off to the next exit and let them go by. At that point, I realized that I needed to increase my speed a little bit because no one followed the speed limit unless I wanted to create a traffic jam. The other realization that I had soon after that was when I walked into a fast food place like McDonald's. I felt that as I was standing in line that everyone was looking at me. Everyone was staring at me. And some police officers get a sense that, well, they're staring at me because I'm good looking. But and I never had that feeling, but there are officers who feel that once they don the uniform and they become much more popular in the community, that they're either better looking or the uniform commands respect, so that they've earned more respect. But that's not the case. People are looking at the uniform. You stand out, and it doesn't make you better looking. It's the uniform that demands respect rather than the person. So we all, as police officers, need to keep in mind that in order to get respect, you must earn it. And I soon realized that after I took the uniform off and met a police officer for lunch, and they had a uniform on, that the public was staring at the uniform and not the person in the uniform so much. I would stand in line behind a uniformed police officer and would look around the room, and everybody had their eyes on that uniformed police officer. And so once the uniform came off, you were not the center of attention anymore. And that is something that police officers realize right away, that people will pay attention to you because of the job you do and the uniform that you have on. Strangers, not necessarily because of who you are, but for what you represent. That is it for this lecture. Have a good day.